Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2004 science fiction thriller film, The Butterfly Effect. Now, this is a film that I remember seeing the trailers for like once or twice, and I thought it looked like it could be interesting, but at the same time, I'm really not that big of a fan of Ashton Kutcher. So I think that's a big reason why I just didn't really get around to watching this until recently. And I can say after seeing the film, I thought it was okay. I thought it was a decent film, but it could have been so much better than that. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the butterfly effect, I want to give a shout out to Andrew for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Butterfly Effect is directed by Eric Bress and J. Mack Gruber, who also wrote the film. And this is their directorial debut. They were writers on Final Destination 2, and I think that's really the main reason why they got this job, because they had no directing experience previously. And sometimes that can pan out and can work in a film's favor, and it still turns out to be something genuinely good, if not great, when it comes to a director's, first time behind a camera. But I think because of the fact that you had two directors doing their first film, you had not only one director going through their growing pains, but now you had two directors going through their growing pains at the same time. And it led to a film visually and directing wise that was just kind of all over the map. Like, this is a movie that has some moments when it comes to its direction that is really inspired and features some really technically terrific and well achieved shots. And the moments when these directors really get the shot done the right way and they are able to show consistency and to show their talent and really do a lot with the camera, those are moments that definitely stand out. But then there's a lot of other moments that don't stand out in the same way. And so you see scenes in the film that don't really match those moments of inspired brilliance when it comes to the direction, when it comes to the shot selection or the framing or the usage of the angles or the pans or the different kind of zooms and so on and so forth. And so not only is that an issue, but you also have a problem when it comes to the way that the film is shot. It looks cheap at points. It really does. And I know it wasn't a significantly big budget film, but it really does not look like a movie that cost $13 million. It doesn't really look like the entirety of that budget was really on display, other than maybe some of the visual effects sequences. Because there's a lot of moments where it looks very cheap. And then there's other moments where it looks like a teen drama that you would see on the CW. And it has some really washed out, blown out colors. And the visual style is just not necessarily always meshing with the tone of the sequence. Like, there are moments where it really blends in well, but then there's other moments where, because of the way that the scenes were lit or the way that the scenes were shot, it doesn't really come across in a way that I think actually matches with what the story is trying to do for like the first few minutes. Everything looks like it's not a flashback of something that happened in reality. It looks like a flashback of something that happened in a dream. And so there's a lot of that inconsistency throughout this film and throughout the film's directing. And I do feel that the direction, despite the moments of inspiration, despite the moments of brilliance from these two directors, I think this film would have been better off with a more established, more accomplished filmmaker, and it's not two guys just doing their first movie. But that's just me personally, because I seem to be uh, definitely in the minority on that, because I've seen a lot of praise for these two directors and their work in this film, and I think it's deserved when it comes to the shots that they get right. But there are a lot of stuff that isn't on the same level. And another thing that's really not on the same level is the consistency of the performances that they get out of their cast. There's a lot of moments of line delivery in this, and a lot of moments from various different actors in this production that if you had a more established filmmaker, they would have looked at the dailies and been like, this take is terrible. We cannot include this take in the final cut. We're going to do this again because this isn't going to cut it. This isn't going to work. Like this makes this look like amateur hour. So you have these two guys trying to learn on the fly and they don't know what to look for. So as a result, you have a movie visually and from a directorial perspective that is just really not at a high level. Now, The Butterfly Effect is written by Eric Bress and J. Mac Gruber, and their direction, in my opinion, is not as good as it could be, and I also feel the same way about the script. I think the script is better than their direction, but I still feel that the screenplay is just adequate. It's all right when it could have been genuinely amazing. And the biggest thing that holds this film back, in my opinion, from being truly great and a genuine gem for me is the screenplay. And it's kind of crazy because this is a script that was considered to be like one of the best unproduced scripts out there before it ultimately got greenlit. And I can see why that's the case when it comes to its overall concept. Its overall concept is really cool and unique. It's a nice twist on the time travel concept and idea mixed with some chaos theory. And I think that's definitely a major selling point of this script and a major strength of this script for the most part. But this is also a script that it just isn't as polished. It isn't as well put together as it could be. And because of that, it takes a really cool, just amazing concept and just makes an okay story out of it. It doesn't help that it doesn't really start off that well. Like the first 20 minutes or so of the story that are all like taking place in the past when Evan is a kid, it's pretty brutal. It was really rough for me personally, and not because of the intense subject matter. That wasn't the reason why. The reason why is because it was just so over the top and melodramatic to the point of absurdity. I couldn't take it seriously. It came across as forced and completely and totally unrealistic. The way that the intense memories just came one after another, it came across like it was just completely ludicrous to me. Like one intense memory like that, okay, but like a cascading waterfall of these intense memories, like all at the same time. I know that that might happen in some people's actual lives, sadly, But the way that it's presented in the movie, it just really feels like the writer is just trying a little too hard to be edgy and to be dark and twisted, and it doesn't come across as genuine. And so like the first like 20 minutes or so, I was just like, oh man, this is not good. But once Evan is an adult now and he's in college, it it got better. And it started to draw me in when he first was able to travel back in time to this moment in his past, and he's got the cigarette, and he winds up getting burned by the cigarette when he was a kid, and then he snaps out of it, and now he's got the cigarette burn on his chest. On his chest. Like the way things were building up, the way things started with him figuring out how to time travel, and then him going back home to try to reconnect with his past, was a really good start. And I felt that it was a good direction that the story was heading in. And then it takes a wild detour, and I was left scratching my head, but it wound up still pulling me in again despite that. But the wild detour is definitely one of the parts of the script that I feel really lets this film down when it comes to its overall potential. And what I mean by that is Evan goes back home. He's trying to reconnect with his past, trying to remember these these traumatic, horrific events that happened in his childhood. And he goes to the home of his friend Lenny, and Lenny is all catatonic and nonverbal, and it seems like he's stunted mentally because of the trauma that he experienced. And he goes to Lenny and he's trying to get him to help him out in terms of remembering. And Lenny helps him, but in a way that's rather intense in terms of like physically assaulting Evan and yelling at him. But it's the kind of stuff that does happen with people who were in this kind of traumatic state. And he then decides to go further and try to remember what he can't remember. And so he goes and he finds Kaylee. And he, just like with Lenny, didn't really go about things very well in terms of trying to piece together his memories. Does it in a very, let's just say, rude fashion, to be honest. Just shows up out of nowhere and just starts trying to ask this poor woman to tell him about what happened when they were kids, to have her unlock some childhood trauma, to help him unlock his own, and not very tactful. And Kaylee doesn't take that well and blows up at him. And then he finds out later that she took her life. And her brother, who abused him and was just a psychotic little shit when they were kids, now he's all grown up. And now that he found out that he was seeing Kaylee again, or saw her again, and caused her to kill herself, or at least he thinks that he caused her to kill herself, he's now gonna get some revenge. And I see what the writers are trying to do here. And they set things up as this is the reason why Evan decides to go back and try to change the past so he can save Kaylee. But I don't think they went about it the right way. This is what I'm talking about taking a detour. Because I feel like the direction that they should have taken, and the direction that I felt they were going towards, is that Kaylee has her emotional outburst that night when Evan sees her again after all this time. But she settles down, she turns around, she apologizes to Evan. She mentions that, he brought up a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, and she's not really ready to deal with that right now. But, she gives him his number, tells him, I'm sorry. I can see that you're hurting too, and you want to try to find a way to heal. And I just can't deal with that right now. Give me a few days, maybe give me a call, and maybe, we can talk. Maybe we can, deal with this together. And, a few days go by and Evan calls her and they set up a meeting to go meet up together somewhere, and they start hitting it off. And they aren't really talking about their trauma at this moment. They're just talking about, when they were kids, and talking about the good times, the times when they were young, and they weren't dealing with whatever kind of abuse or whatever kind of craziness that they sometimes dealt with. And that spark that they had when they were kids, it gets reignited, and they fall in love, and they form a meaningful relationship and connection with one another again. They become very, very close. And, the point where, there's potentially talk about getting married and all this other sort of stuff. Late one night at Evan and Kaylee's home or apartment, Tommy breaks in. He got out of whatever prison or whatever place he was held up at, and he's intending to kill Evan. He's intending to finish what he started when they were kids, because he found out about Kaylee and Evan, how they're together, and because he's a psycho, he's not going to let that stand. And so he breaks in, tries to kill Evan. Evan and Tommy get in a fight. In the process, Tommy winds up grabbing Kaylee because she's trying to get Tommy off of Evan, and he throws her, and she winds up hitting like a cabinet or something, and she either gets a fatal head wound or she breaks her neck. So in this whole scuffle, Kaylee winds up getting killed by her brother, and because of that, Evan is understandably infuriated, and he retaliates and kills Tommy. Kind of a tie-in to what you had in the actual film when it comes to the frat boy universe, when Evan snaps and kills Tommy. But in this instance, I think it's a little more justified and isn't as forced as it came across in that particular alternate universe or alternate timeline. And instead of Kaylee killing herself because of him coming out of hiding and trying to ask her for help, and Tommy threatening to kill him, and that's why he decides to try to go back in time and save Kaylee, instead he goes back in time to save Kaylee again, but with a completely different context. He's not trying to save some fantasy romance between the two of them that never really came to be. Instead, he's trying to save and salvage something that was real, something that was genuine. And he's doing this to once again try to avoid coming to terms with his trauma. That's what the whole theme and the whole core of the story is, or should have been. And you have it set up this way, you go in that direction, then you have something tangible for the audience to really hold on to in terms of the drama. Because after a certain point, all that Evan is doing is trying to save a fantasy. And then he gives up the fantasy at the end of the story. So it doesn't really have that much of an impact, at least not to me personally. But if he's giving up something that's real, that's powerful. And that hurts. And I would set it up where instead of him trying to do this stuff and change things in a certain way just so he can be with Kaylee, he's changing the past to try to stop Tommy. He's trying to stop Tommy from doing the stuff at the junkyard. He's trying to stop Tommy from, doing the stuff with the bomb and the birdhouse or the mailbox. He's trying to stop Tommy and Kaylee from being abused by their dad. He's trying to stop all of this stuff. That's what he's trying to do. And similar to what you have actually set up in the script that was actually shot for the film, when he does this, he changes the future and he alters things significantly. But each time that he alters the timeline, he alters Kaylee in some way. He hurts her. He hurts Kaylee each time that he alters this timeline. He hurts her in a multitude of different ways. Like maybe he decides to first go back to the night when Tommy broke in and try to kill him, and then ultimately kill Kaylee. He tries to stop Tommy, and he does manage to stop Tommy, but in the process, Kaylee still gets hurt, but she survives. But she got so cut up and so damaged physically that she's horrifically disfigured now, and so he can't deal with that. That's not something that he's willing to live with because Kaylee not only got hurt, but she's like horrifically disfigured. And so, okay, that didn't work. I gotta go and do something else. And so he does goes back to the junkyard or whatever, and he prepares himself to fight Tommy. And all that happens is he screws up and attacks Tommy again and does it in a way that really hurts him. And that hurts Kaylee to the point where she actually winds up getting PTSD in the future and doesn't want anything to do with Evan because she is just constantly reminded of this traumatic moment when she was young. And that could be the moment where in that timeline she ultimately killed herself, if you want to go that far, or got addicted to pills or something, or some sort of situation like that. And so Evan's like, okay, that didn't work, I gotta go and do something else. And then in each timeline where he's trying to stop Tommy, to save Kaylee, to save his relationship with her, things just get altered in dramatic ways and in traumatic ways. Like, you could have the frat boy thing, but instead it's like she's now like the sorority queen, and she's vapid and self-absorbed and is like an awful person now. And that's what happens when he goes back and prevents her dad from abusing her. And so now she's just like this horrible, bad person. And I know some people, oh, that's not a good message. Well, this is what the butterfly effect is. Like, oh, you think that it's going to do this, but then it does this instead. He can't live with that timeline, so he has to decide to go back again. My idea is that the final timeline would be similar to what you saw when he was disabled, but you go even further than that. He changes things. He does the whole stuff with the mailbox. He winds up getting blown up, and he wakes up and he sees on the mantelpiece a photo of Kaylee in a wedding dress, and he sees himself in a wheelchair sitting next to her. And then he has this sudden realization that he's paralyzed from the neck down and he can't move. And he's looking around the room and he's seeing all these other photos of them throughout all these different years, because when he went into this timeline, he was put into a coma, and Kaylee was there by his side for all these years, and he woke up from the coma eventually, and she never left him, and she decides to be with him for the rest of his life, and she becomes his caretaker, and she bathes him and cleans him, and you see a lot of this, you see the scenes from both Evan and her perspective taking care of him. And this is the only timeline where he's actually able to be with her, is when she has sacrificed her entire life to be with him and also to care for him. She sacrificed everything. She sacrificed her career. She sacrificed whatever aspirations she might have had, a lot of other things that she might have wanted to do in her life. She sacrificed it all to be there for him. And like, this is the moment where he realizes that I've got to fix this. I got to stop doing what I've been trying to do. The only way that I can fix this is to make it so we're not together. Because I can't live with this, where not only am I paralyzed and I can't live my life, but she can't live her life either because of me. And so that's where he asks about the home movies, and you could have this really just poignant, heart-wrenching scene where he's sitting there in the wheelchair. The home movies are on the TV or in the television. He's watching the moment when he and Kaylee first met when they were kids at the birthday party. And Kaylee's there by his side and, also emotional. And he's crying and, changes the timeline, goes back to that moment, tells her that, I don't love you. I never want to see you again. And then he wakes up back in the current timeline where he's at it in his college dorm. He winds up, deciding to finish that paper that he was supposed to do, that essay for that teacher, for the professor, gets that done, turns that in, and then decides to go take a walk and, make sure that everything is, normal again. And he goes and walks, in a park, and he sees Kaylee. And he then sees Tommy, and he sees that they're both happy and they're in a good place. And then kind of smiles to himself a little bit and then walks away. And that's the end of the story. To me, that's so much more emotionally resonant than what the script actually is. Because I think that's really what this script is lacking the most, is an actual genuine beating heart and soul. Like, it's trying to have that, and I can see the beginnings of that, but it never really coalesces for me. Because he's just given up a fantasy. He's fighting for a fantasy that never really happened, and it also doesn't seem like the whole theme about acceptance and getting over your trauma and grief was really that well realized by the end of the story. No matter what ending you pick, whether it's the ending that was actually in the theatrical version of the film where he sees her all these years later because she's some successful businesswoman or something, and sees her on the street and just looks, and then she looks back, and then he looks forward and keeps walking, or the ending when he strangles himself with his own umbilical cord, or the other alternate ending, it still makes the entire story and the script kind of feel like it didn't really amount to a lot in terms of a core message or theme, because it's not consistent enough. and it just kind of is a bit too meandering, and it takes too many detours that it didn't necessarily have to. But something along those lines that builds an actual genuine emotional connection. So when he gives all that up, when he tells her that he doesn't want to be with her, and he just completely severs ties with her, and just gives up any future with her, it's so much more devastating than him just throwing away a fantasy that never was real to begin with. The detour that the script takes and the lack of a real tangible emotional core is arguably the biggest issue that I have with the script. But I do have some other problems, like the sense of humor at points. To me, it's not really that funny, and there are more instances where it winds up being like unintentionally comedic, and I don't really feel that that's necessarily the right vibe for this story. Also, there are some really dumb moments in this. I can suspend my disbelief to a certain point. But when you have stuff like the prison stigmata scene, which is just completely breaking all of the film's rules in terms of how this time travel works, you've lost me. The way that things are set up, he would always have those marks on his hands. And it didn't need to be that way. There are other ways you could have written that and set it up where he could still get the notebooks back that don't have to involve prison stigmata. And a lot of the tonal stuff still just really bugs me. But there still are some really good bits. There are some great moments. I really like the way that it incorporates the journals and how he uses his memories in order to go back in time. I like that there's a nice variety of these different time travel events. I like how it incorporates things like when Evan had a knife in the kitchen, his mom was freaked out about it, and incorporates that into the story later on, and it makes you think one thing but it's actually something else entirely. That, oh, it's not him being crazy, it's actually something that's tied into the time travel, and he tried to do something and he failed. I like how the pieces of the puzzle are filled in, and the questions are answered for the most part throughout the story. It continues to be somewhat compelling. Not somewhat compelling, it continues to be genuinely compelling because of the way that things are set up and presented in terms of the mystery and these questions and how Evan is going to try to get out of this situation that he's put himself in. But without the strong emotional core, with all the tonal inconsistencies, it just winds up being a story and a script that is just at the level of being fine. Now, the cast and their performances is honestly equally as mixed as the rest of the film is for me. Um, Ashton Kutcher is not entirely terrible. He has some great moments, but there's a lot of moments where it seems like he's kind of indifferent or just kind of there or just going through the motions or isn't really delivering the best quality for his lines. So it's a performance to me personally that definitely could have been better. And I think the film could have been better if you had a better actor as a lead, but he was still better than any of the young kids who played young Evan. Um, Melora Walters was horrifically awful as his mother. I don't know what the hell was going on with this performance. This performance was abysmal. It was really bad. It was so bad that it knocked the film down like a peg just by itself. Amy Smart, I thought she did a pretty solid job as Kaylee. So did the young actresses who played young Kaylee. Henson, he was pretty decent as Lenny. It was nice to see Fulton Reed from the Mighty Ducks play a pretty varied role like this, where he played Lenny in different forms throughout different timelines. William Lee Scott was serviceable, but he was definitely better than the actor who played his 13-year-old self. Like Jesse James was pretty brutal, pretty bad. Didn't buy him at all when it comes to the scenes when he's supposed to be psychotic or intimidating. Eric Stoltz played a pretty believably creepy creep of a dad. Um, Even Suplee was fun as Thumper, Evan's best friend in college. So it has some good performances in it. I would say Amy Smart is probably the one that stands out the most, and some serviceable ones, but it's very mixed. It's just honestly just a varied degree of quality. There's not really consistently great performances throughout it. Now, I feel the same way about the cinematography. There's some great looking shots, and then there's some other shots that look cheap and don't really look that good. The editing, on the other hand, by Peter Adamson, I definitely felt it was better overall than what Matthew F. Leonetti brought to the screen with his cinematography. And I think the editing added a lot to the overall atmosphere of the film and to the energy of the different time travel sequences. And the music by Michael Subi, I don't think it was that impressive, but it was so. It was all right. I like some of the songs they featured in the film more than the actual score. And pacing wise, it's a little slow at points, especially at the beginning, because it's just so over the top and melodramatic that it just gets a little old and tiring. But it picks itself up decently enough, and then it maintains your interest and is fairly compelling after that point. I am not as enamored with it or as blown away by it or as impressed by it as others are, but I can see what it's trying to do. It's one of those like what if kind of movies. Like this could have been a classic if they went a different direction with the story, or they had a better lead actor, a better director instead of these first time directors who never directed a film before. But that's just me personally. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of The Butterfly Effect, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.